Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 29th of June, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. I've put on quite a bright shirt today to lift the mood post-Brexit. Certainly need something to lift the mood because the weather here in UK is pretty appalling. Damp, wet, grey, cold, misty. What else can we say? That's about it. The good news is that we've got Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches joining us today, and he's in the southern part of Holland where we can see blue sky, clouds. Of course, there's a little bit of wind to drive those windmills to keep the water level down.
Yes. Alex, we're just going to show this map. Tell us a bit about, you're right beside the major shipping lanes. Is there much traffic today?
There is a huge amount, Mike, and I'm on the southern tip of that peninsula in the town of Vlissingen, VL, that you can see there, although we used to call it Flushing in English, and that was a snapshot of marinetraffic.com this morning. So you can see plenty of shipping, serious cargo shipping, and the camera is struggling to capture the beautiful blue skies behind me because I'm just behind glass to keep out of the wind here. But you may see during the programme quite a few cargo vessels going past because this is the shipping lane from Antwerp out to the Channel, Antwerp being one of the most important ports. And you may be surprised to see how much German and other European cargo is actually going out of Europe. Europe still has things to export, and particularly if you see cargo ships going that way. So from the camera's point of view to the right, I think, well anyway, that way, what you'll see then is stuff actually being exported from Europe, particularly from Germany, which kind of shows how important Benelux is to the German and Central European economy. And one further point about where I'm staying, it's actually the Belgian Pilot Society, who are these very admirable gentlemen who go out to the cargo ships and have very specialist knowledge of the treacherous shipping channels into the Antwerp roads. So they actually pile out in their launches from this building out to the cargo ships to relieve another crew of pilots to guide the cargo ships in and out of Antwerp. So it gives you a sense really that Europe still does have an exporting economy, which we sometimes forget in Britain, and that there is much to play for in the current months and years ahead.
Yeah, so contrary to mainstream media propaganda, trade hasn't stopped completely as a result of Brexit then?
Not at all, not at all. I mean, I come here 3-4 times a year, and cargo is always booming, summer and winter. And it's by no means just Chinese shipping inbound. There's a lot of stuff going out of here as well.
Okay, well, thank you for that opening, Alex. We'll just introduce a little bit of the total chaos, the ridiculous nature of the British media at the moment. And I had to pick on Tim Farron here, who's reported in Breitbart. And remember that we really don't have a party anymore called the Lib Dems. And we'll also remember that this man, Tim Farron, is the man who has done nothing to act or speak out about abused children. He's been given a lot of reports, simply doesn't want to engage. But what he says in this report is the British people deserve the chance not to be stuck with the appalling consequences of a Leave campaign that stoked anger with the lies of Farage, Johnson and Gove. And he says the Liberal Democrats, or what's left of them, will fight the next election on a clear and unequivocal promise to restore British prosperity and role in the world, with the United Kingdom in the European Union, not out of it. So it is extraordinary that this man simply says to 17 million people who voted out, you're just full of hate, you're disgusting people. And this, of course, is the pattern now. We're seeing that anybody who's dared to speak out is being labelled as a xenophobe, full of hate, hatred of foreigners, complete lies from a man who was obviously too frightened to put his head above the parapet to do something to protect children who were being abused. And then we can come to the other end of the scale, and we've got the Guardian here with an image, of course, that Britain is all about to fall apart, the shops are going to be empty, etc. But we're being given a lesson, really, on what to do about this by Gordon Brown. And he says the elephant in the room is globalization. But when you actually read the article, what does Gordon Brown have to say? he simply says that, well, the real problem is that globalization hasn't got the right leadership at the moment. So I think that one needs a little bit of looking at. But of course, for people who don't know, this man has done the equivalent of Tony Blair. He set up the Gordon Brown and Sarah website, all about himself, all about them. And remember that this man has now been let loose with the world's children. He's the United Nations Special Envoy for Global Education. And how is he going to do that? Well, what a surprise, because Gordon and Sarah are working with corporate leaders who are committed to delivering on the promise of a quality education for the world's children. A global coalition of business leaders for education. This really turns my stomach, because a lot of reports about this man and his interest in children and education. And what are we saying here? That we're going to allow huge global companies to simply educate our children for stacking?
I think we're already seeing the effects of that, aren't we?
Yeah.
I wonder if Alex got any comment?
Well, picking up on the last element first, I was reading a very worthy lady's comment on the failures of third wave feminism this morning, and I hope we may be interviewing her in the Insight Vox series at some point. But she makes the pertinent point that we are sold on the idea that women and the economically disenfranchised need a career, but they don't get a career, they get jobs. And it's all done in the name of get a career because the people at the top want a career. And to link that back to what you said at the beginning about children deserving a chance, and before that, the British people deserve a chance, you can see the goody-goody patronising element coming in, can't you? You know, it's all much as children are said to deserve better than this, so the electorate is now being told, you deserve better than to be ruled by your own inclinations and customs. No, you deserve us as leaders. And it's perhaps no surprising that the president of the Liberal Democrats, Mr. Farron, worded that so explicitly, because as I tweeted out earlier in the week, there is a segment on the YouTube channel Liar Politicians, a wonderful name for a YouTube channel, in which we see Vince Cable saying that there was no need, in his view, or that of his party, the Liberal Democrats, to have held a referendum because, he says, quote, it was not a constitutional issue. And now David Scott picked up on that and tweeted back to Vince Cable, please look up the dictionary definitions of the words liberal and democrat. You are neither, Mr. Cable.
Well, that's right, Alex, but in that same video clip, he also said that decisions like this shouldn't be left to plebiscite.
And a lot of people thought he was saying left to the plebs, but although that's a false etymology, the root is the same, Latin word plebs meaning the people. And, you know, if you use the word plebiscite rather than referendum, especially with his old-fashioned pronunciation plebiscite rather than plebiscite, then you're just betraying the fact that you have been brought up on this diet of, you see, Weimar Germany and Nazi Germany had plebiscites and it all went wrong. You know, the word referendum, which he's avoiding, is a much more recent vintage in European and British politics as a word, and it has a much more respectable cachet, meaning put this to the people. Whereas to use the word plebiscite is, even in your choice of language, is this offhand denigrating attitude of, you know, the plebs can't be trusted.
Yes. Yes.
Well, of course, on top of that, we've got the press desperately trying to whip up hate, and we've come back to the local Plymouth Herald newspaper. Incredible story here, a whole story which is about hate on the back of the fact that somebody's graffitied a slogan on a wall which says that immigration built Britain, or something fairly close to that. So I just took part of the text. The graffiti comes after reports of more than a 50% rise in hate crime towards ethnic minorities across the UK being reported to the police since Thursday's EU referendum. I'd like to see the statistics on that and the proof of those statistics. But if we just think about Plymouth, 79,997 people voted leave, according to the Evening Herald. 53,000 voted remain. So it appears to me that the Herald is saying, well, there's roughly 80,000 people in Plymouth who are just full of hate. I mean, this isn't a good way to get people to buy your newspaper. If I did buy the paper, which I certainly don't, but if I did buy it, I would stop because it's telling me I'm full of hate and xenophobia.
I wonder who put the graffiti on the wall. Was it the journalist?
Well, it could have been anybody, but it certainly could have been Remain, because what do they want to do? stir up the impression that anybody who dared to vote to come out the EU is some form of extremist. There's a propaganda exercise going on here which is so blatant. I think more and more people are seeing through it. So that's probably a positive point, Mike.
Okay, Alex, this is for you. We talked about this a little on Monday, this Spiegel article. You've captioned this European semester. Give us your take on it.
Yes, Der Spiegel was in receipt of Federica Mogherini's blueprint for the way ahead to European defence unification, and they were in receipt of that before the referendum. And there was some some British press getting wind of that, such as the Express. This is the document. Now we have it now in German translation, courtesy of Der Spiegel. But David Ellis on the Tuesday programme, that's 27th of June 2016, UK column, has already spoken about this at length, and he's very aptly said this is about the EU in the person of Mogherini going shopping, procurement, right? But there is a paragraph in the German of Der Spiegel which I think I ought to bring to people's notice, which is about the European semester. That is deliberately impenetrable jargon, but it means the regular annual round whereby the European Union member states look at each other and say, well, you're going to buy X and I'm going to buy Y, and we're not going to reduplicate effort, are we? And that is already a reality in budget, and it's now going to become a reality, according to La Mogherini, in defence as well. So Mr. Ellis is 100% on the money. It has been planned since before the referendum, long before, and now released in this moment of crisis, that the European Union member states, including or the foreseeable future Her Majesty's government, are going to be sucked into this European semester for defence, which means interoperability or interdependability rather, and not being able to have all your equipment yourself.
And you wanted to just highlight the Common Security and Defence Policy?
Yes, have a look at this page on Wikipedia, the Common Security and Defence Policy. I don't know, Mike, whether you have the illustrations up, do you?
No, I don't.
That's no problem, but if you go to the Wikipedia page for CSDP, have a look at the two illustrations in that article, because they show in the map that we do not have an opt-out. Only the Danes have an opt-out within the EU on the CSDP. It is a third pillar of the European Union, which came along in 2009 with the Lisbon Treaty, and we did not opt out of it. We can't have this lazy assumption that whenever there's an opt-out, Britain is one of the opt-out states. It isn't. Gordon Brown did not opt us out of the CSDP, and we are committed to everything, and we have wound up the Western European Union, which is the European version of NATO, the mutual commitment to defence, because of having signed up to CSDP at Lisbon Treaty. And if you look at the concentric circles or overlapping sets of countries diagram on that Wikipedia page, you will see that Britain is right at the heart of several of the EU and European generally military integration projects. The only one we're not in is the gendarmerie, but we're in both of the air projects, the Air Force integration and the air space control, and there's no Navy equipment yet, but we are in the Army integration as well. So we're right at the heart of things, and that's not stopping.
Well, that's a very interesting point you make, because yesterday we recorded an edition of Insight covering exactly this. This was exactly one of the topics in that. That will be available probably early next week. And we had that specific diagram up and discussed it on the program. But the other thing that you mentioned there, Alex, was this word interdependence. And we see this is something which a lot of people miss. It's something which is fundamental to so many policies. We're seeing that not only in defence policy, but in manufacturing. I mean, if we look at Airbus as an example, Airbus is, there's no factory in any particular country which is totally independent. It is interdependent on the British to make the wings, on the Germans to do something else. We're seeing Boeing moving towards this model and moving factories away from Seattle, although they're not moving to an international model yet. But interdependence at every level of governance at the moment, it is a staggering move in that direction, isn't it?
It very much is. I've been speaking to David Ellis one-to-one since he's become regular on the UK column, and I won't go into detail, but I can confirm his trustworthiness, which just oozes out of what he says anyway, and his bearing, because it so happens that we were in the same locality 20 years ago and met some of the same evildoers and put two halves of our stories together and completed the jigsaw puzzle. So David Ellis has really got his head screwed on. And the interdependability that we're talking about, I've seen personally in living in post-Soviet Georgia, where the town just outside Tbilisi, where they made the aluminium sheeting and tubing called Rustavi. That's due to central planning, deliberately made the aluminium sheeting. Okay, that's a civilian application, but it made it for the whole of the USSR. And I was there 7-8 years after the collapse of the USSR, and the Georgians were still having to sell their tubing at knockdown rates for replacement currencies to the Latvians and the Ukrainians and the Kazakhs, because they didn't have that capacity there. But there was nothing to go in these aluminium tubes, no toothpaste or whatever. That was being made in another republic. That's a civilian example. The United States has copied this model as well to make sure that no state, not even Texas, can secede. And I do notice, if you just encourage people again to look at the Wikipedia page on the CSDP, the Common Security and Defence Policy. If you look at the overlapping Venn diagram, and then if you take the trouble to look at the individual acronyms of those things that we're in, those bodies, you will see a startling number of them started as a Franco-British bilateral agreement in the mid-90s, at the late stages of the Major government. That is where the treason began. We can't blame Blair for everything.
Well, that is a spectacular segue into the next section, Brian.
It is, because the recent discussion over this forthcoming military, European military machine, is that we've been back looking at the Franco-British Council. And of course, with that wonderful thing, hindsight, we're getting a very, very interesting picture emerge. So let's go back to the 6th of October 2010. So there was a Franco-British Defence Cooperation Roundtable. It was invitation only, it was behind closed doors, and we say it was held to deceive the British public and to facilitate the creation of the EU military. So who was in this? Well, we've got Sir Peter Westmacott, who was the then British ambassador in Paris. So this all took place at his residence. Gisela Stewart was there, very interesting lady, of course, German-born. At the time, Select Committee Foreign Affairs. She was one of the co-chairs. Let's have a look at the rest. Well, we got this very interesting man, Jonathan Isle, from the Royal United Services Institute, which we keep mentioning. He's Romanian by birth, and interesting to see him sitting alongside Britain's German-born MP, Gisela Stewart. And then we can bring in Françoise Hostelier, National Assembly of France. So this is the high-level French government participation, and these form the three co-chairs of the meeting. Well, we've got the military, so Contra-Amiral Pascal Aucer, and we're also very interested in this man who has become extremely powerful in British aerospace, but at the time he was involved with strategic military projects. Huge amount of knowledge in his head about British military capability. And remember, this is a closed door meeting. So we ask straight away, was there a breach of the Official Secrets Act? We've got Senator Xavier Pintat, who was part of the Defence Committee of the French Senate. We had Edward Lee MP. He was an expert at the time on the public purse. Also has a French family links, which I find very interesting. We've got another French admiral. We've got Baroness Taylor, and this gives us an insight because at the time she was UK Minister with a specialist area of defence equipment. So here we can see the procurement starting to come in. And then let's bring in Vice Admiral Paul Lambert, who at the time Deputy Chief of Defence Staff Equipment Capability.
And actually, when we published this article in 2010 in the newspaper, we had a larger image of Paul Lambert. That's a cropped version of it. And he was, if you remember, we captioned it "cap in hand" because he was standing there.
Frontal is the French military company, with almost begging with his cap. But the point is, invite only, closed door meeting back in October 2010. Where this group of pan-European people were deciding how to start integrating European military. Now, isn't it remarkable that Miss Gisela Stewart, if I pronounced that correctly, when the Leave vote was approached with devastating information that there was to be the formation of an EU military, her organisation ran a mile. She did not want to go near the subject. And we're now going to say, could it be that she ran away with her organisation because, of course, she'd sat in the very meetings that had been there to set up the EU military? Now, why do we say that? Well, we're just going to have a look at this statement, and then we'll have a look at a timeline. So this was a quote from the Franco-British Council, and this was one of the earlier meetings. The purpose of this meeting was twofold. Firstly, to extend the Franco-British Council British-French Defence Initiative of October 2009, particularly on the basis of industrial considerations linked to competitive military capabilities. And secondly, ahead of a decisive period in British politics, ahead of the general election in May 2010 and the Strategic Defence Review in the fourth quarter of the same year, it seemed important to resume discussions before the formation of a new government and a reassessment of British strategic priorities, all done behind closed doors, Mike.
Yes.
Very, very interesting. Now look at the timeline. So it was in October 2009 that they'd already put together the British-French Defence Initiative. Then we hop to the 9th of March 2010, where we've got a big meeting on this subject. 11th of May 2010, Cameron forms government. On 6th of October 2010, we've got another high-level meeting about the Franco-British Defence Initiative. And then, hey presto, Cameron's in government, and on the 2nd of November, he can suddenly announce a 50-year defence pact with the French. Why? Because he'd committed treason by putting this together behind closed doors. Alex, it may have been difficult for you to follow that, but if you were able to on your device, any comments?
Yes, Brian, I was able to follow that well, and thank you for putting it together so concisely. On the narrow issue of whether treason was committed and whether the Official Secrets Act was breached, now the likes of me, who have been in the intelligence agencies, signed the Official Secrets Act, and I've always been reminded by those alert to such things like my father that actually signing the OSA doesn't make a blind bit of difference because statutes bind everyone in the realm. It's just really a psychological exercise to make you justly afraid of spilling the beans on Her Majesty's secrets. But one briefing I was given in GCHQ about who gets developed vetting, which is top secret clearance, was very interesting, because I was told that there are certain categories of people who are never given developed vetting because they are held ex officio from their position, from their post, to be held to be trustworthy people because Her Majesty has given them a certain kind of commission. So military officers are developed vetted, so they would be straight out traitors in this mould. But there are, if I'm not mistaken, certain kinds of ambassadors, certain kinds of MPs with access to secret intelligence, QCs, Queen's Counsels, and Privy Councillors, because they have been given a letter from the Queen saying you're a good chap and held her finger and brushed their lips gently over her knuckles, they are not developed vetted. They could argue, therefore, that they haven't broached the Official Secrets Act, although they have committed treason.
Right.
On the wider point of Gisela Schneider, if I'm not mistaken, she came to the country in 1975, the year that we were starting to get unrestful about our membership of the EEC, as it was then. And it's also a very interesting time in German politics because it's just after the transition of Federal Chancellor from Willy Brandt to Helmut Schmidt. And Willy Brandt had to resign because East German communist moles were found in his office. I'll just leave that hanging.
Which is ideal because
Yes.
I think there's going to be a lot more discussion about this, and certainly we've got a lot more to say about it.
So, Alex, should we worry that English is not going to be an official EU language following Brexit?
Well, it would be a great tragedy for me professionally because the EU is the greatest gravy train going for interpreters and translators. But no, we shouldn't worry. This shows you, just in a domain I know a lot about, language, but it reflects out to other issues, shows you how little understanding there is in these hastily penned pieces that are appearing in outlets like Politico.eu and our broadsheet papers as well. There are two other member states of the EU, which are not in danger of leaving, the Irish Republic and Malta. Well, they're certainly not going to leave because they're eyes deep in debt. So they're dependent on the munificence of Germany et al. But anyway, they have English as an official language. And the idea is that because they have in their own right said, after joining, well, we'd like our traditional languages, Maltese and Irish respectively, to be official languages. Therefore, according to one reading of the treaty, they don't have a right to specify English. So if and when the UK leaves, is the line, English will not be an official language. Well, it's just a narrow example of what idiocy is written, because Irish officials, they're just like British officials. They're not going to be able to read documents in French and German or speak in French and German from the floor. So, of course, English will carry on.
Yes. Okay, well, you wanted me to include this one. The EU referendum shows how the sovereignty of Britain's people can now trump its parliament. And you asked me to put a couple of quotes on here. How do you want to do this? Do you want to discuss this first and put the quotes up?
No, I think if you read the quotes out from your end, Mike, that's probably best.
Okay, so the first one says, but immediate repeal of the European Communities Act would be contrary to the legal procedures laid out in the Lisbon Treaty of 2007. It would also be impracticable. There is a huge corpus of EU law said to cover more than 80,000 pages of the statute book, the result of 43 years of membership. Much of this is in the form of EU regulations, which have become part of EU law without needing ratification. UK law, without needing ratification by Parliament. Some of this corpus of law on such matters as equal opportunities in the workplace and workers' rights we would wish to retain. Some we might seek to retain in modified form or to repeal. It will be Parliament's task to decide, and this will take time. For now, Parliament will probably decide to incorporate all EU secondary legislation so that it remains in force unless and until it is decided whether to amend or repeal it. Britain will not leave the EU until the withdrawal agreement provided for by the Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty is signed. Then it goes on to say the new Prime Minister will not enjoy a majority for Brexit in the Commons, since more than 2/3 of MPs are opposed to it. The Commons, therefore, is unrepresentative. That is the case for a general election. Some may struggle against further recognition of the claims of the insurgents. Perhaps they would prefer the humiliation of being required to vote for things they do not believe. The people, however, have become, for constitutional issues at least, a third chamber of the legislature with the power to issue instructions which politicians cannot ignore. The sovereignty of the people trumps the sovereignty of Parliament. But surely, Alex, this is absolutely the fundamental constitutional position, and for any MP to suggest that or to demand that Parliament is sovereign it's disingenuous at best.
It's very disingenuous, Mike. The author of this is Vernon Bogdana. He's not just another writer. He has literally written the textbook on the modern British Constitution, as he rather suspiciously calls it. I mean, he wouldn't dare just write a book called The British Constitution and to be the modern British Constitution. Others talk about an evolving constitution, just like the Americans are now being told that the Constitution is an evolving document and all such things, a living document. No, constitutions are constitutions. Well, look at what Mr. Bogdana's arguing. Like a lot of people below him in the pyramid, he cannot dare say that the Constitution allows us, allows MPs certain things. So modal verbs have to be deployed, yes, could be seen as, might tend to, that kind of thing. But he's not saying at any point, because he knows jolly well it's not true, he's not saying that the people cannot withdraw unilaterally from the EU through general election of MPs who promised to repeal the European Communities Act 1972. Instead, he fluffs and fudges that by saying, well, it would be very unilateral. Towards the end of what you read out, he's suggesting that the people have become a third chamber of the Parliament. But any constitutional book will start by saying that the Crown in Parliament, which is the people in Parliament, because the Crown swears the coronation oath to the people to govern us by our laws and customs, the Crown in Parliament, or the people in Parliament, is the very foundation. The people were there before Parliament. Parliament was called into being by Magna Carta. So this gets to the heart of a lot of other articles that we'll read go at this in some other way. But the heart of the matter is, what is the hierarchical relationship in leaving the EU between Article 50 of a treaty and revocation of the European Communities Act 1972? And any honest answer has to say revoking the European Communities Act 1972 is leaving the EU, because treaties are governments talking to each other. They're not sovereign peoples talking to each other. Sovereign peoples can't bind themselves. So absolutely, the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty with no reference to law or customs is an 18th century English aberration. Not even English prudentialists like Coke before the 18th century would ever have countenanced it. Scotland has never accepted it. We need to take a good, fresh look at what the Constitution actually is.
Alex, we were told many years ago from a number of different sources, including, a number of different sources that the Queen had accepted mediatisation. This really is not generally recognised, but do you have any view on what the constitutional situation is, if that is true?
Well, there's been throughout the whole of European constitutional history, there's been a view that thrones can never be vacant, and that includes presidencies in republics, that there is always a state power. And the purest constitutional position across Europe and the United States is that if a head of state makes him or herself unacceptable by vacating the throne, which we did once have, by the way. James II literally did a bunk with the Great Seal of England, which he dropped over the side of his boat in the Thames, somewhere near Chatham, and a fisherman recovered it. If that happens, or if the sovereign makes him or herself unfit to live up to the coronation oath, then power devolves back to the people. Yes, there is an heir proclaimed. That's why we say the king is dead, long live the king, because you can never have a gap. But you cannot say that a crown that's gone awry is still ruling through its ministers. If anyone's wondering what mediatization is, it's the process that Napoleon used to break up the Holy Roman Empire, the German Empire, in 1806. After centuries of these sovereign principalities in Germany, Napoleon came along to these prince-bishops and said, you can still be lord of your 5 acres of land and keep the bells and whistles as long as you allow me to set up a sovereign state in Germany. You see, so transference of sovereignty.
Yes. Okay. Well, that explains that quite nicely. Thank you very much for that. Now, Guido Fawkes, then, are we going to kill Farage?
I can't believe this stuff. Catherine Gee. I mean, I don't know if this is the Barclay twins made this hire, but it certainly shows you the way that the Telegraph is going. She's suggesting on screen here in her tweets yesterday that it would have been a good idea to kill Nigel Farage as a baby, and she's a Telegraph journalist. Now, if you look at her Twitter feed, it's sex, 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 celebrities, celebrities, sex. And we're to believe her on politics?
Well, if I may, Alex, I've seen this increasingly, really. If you just go to look at the journalists who are responsible for stories, Daily Mail, wherever it is, I now regularly read the story and then I go to look at the journalist, and you go and look at their Facebook page or their Twitter accounts, and they are overwhelmingly full of puerile, very, very immature stuff. And this is the quality of the journalists that we've got at the moment. It's tragic, but of course this is being done because the money isn't there, or the money's been stopped, so the newspapers to pay for proper investigative journalism, which is why, of course, we are doing it.
Alex, does the Telegraph have any decent journalists left?
There are even one or two who are now newly being hired, but they suffer from a generational understanding gap. Those of my age who are coming on board now, like Juliet Samuel, now you've mentioned her a couple of times, including I think this very week. She is a sound writer, but there's very few in my generation who've had the education. I'm, thank God, one of the very few. It doesn't make me a better person, but it makes me a more privileged person who can see through the nonsense that's claimed about this country's history and politics. Juliet Samuel can only see the nonsense in cultural terms. Ambrose Evans Pritchard is still the doyen of Telegraph writers, and it bears repeating. He was the only journalist who discovered how many bodies had piled up behind the Clintons in 1990s Arkansas, because the American journalists in Washington couldn't be bothered to fly out to Little Rock, and he could. So he's the best, and he's got a sound economic judgment as well. But the model Brian mentions is in overdrive now. Content and traffic generation, that to the extent that the online team of a newspaper just is using its respectable brand name to generate twaddle, and the writers are under 25, and they're just copying straight out of BuzzFeed. Yes. So we've got a real opportunity here for the UK column, I hope, in the Vanguard to become the respectable news in this country, because at the moment we're sitting here in makeshift studios like me here at the seaside, but we have the ideas and the veracity, and the broadsheets don't even bother to do their fact checking, as I try to demonstrate every week when I come on.
Well, if I just say, Alex, you say makeshift studios and you're sat there in a cafe, I can hear a little bit of cups being moved in the background. But when I hear those sounds, I'm picturing a man or a woman going about their daily work. What do they want? They want to have a job that pays them the money they need. They want to get on with their lives. People who are using that cafe want to be there for normal social interaction and enjoyment. And of course, what is going on in the background? We've got these self-imposed leaders creating this vicious superstate. If we could clear these people out of our lives, we could all go back to enjoying our lives, and it wouldn't matter whether we were French or British or German. I don't think ordinary people create wars. I think it's the machinery of state which creates the wars. Probably time to bring in George Soros.
Yes, perfect timing. So Soros continuing to make threats, but this time he's threatening the European Union itself, indirectly, I suppose, but he's saying they're doomed as a result of Brexit and that Brexit must be overturned.
Yes, and this isn't private Fraser saying you're doomed, we can. It's actually got some oomph behind it because Soros can actually fulfill his own prophecies. So he's there talking to the European Council on Foreign Relations, the ECFR. What an interesting body. It sounds like he's got his glove puppet audience and he's telling them, and almost his underlings are, holding up the cards, proclaiming applaud now. I've sat in an audience once. It was incredibly enough. It was in a Christian event. I was never expected it, where a sound man actually held up a card saying "applaud" and then flipped it over to say "stop applauding." So this stuff really does go on.
Yeah.
Soros is showing his desperation for sure. And when he was asked by a plant in the audience, "What do you think about this awful democracy business?" He replied, "No, it's horrible. I'm a Hungarian," he said, "and I can't stand what Viktor Orban has done to my country. He's bringing populism in." There is a claim that Martin Schulz, the Speaker of the European Parliament, or President as they pompously call him, has said that Britain has betrayed the EU principle because the public, the crowd, however you translate the German, are not supposed to decide on their destiny. Now, I haven't been able to trace it down yet. It could be disinformation, but we need to watch that one. Schulz certainly has that mentality, but there is an attitude growing that people can't be trusted with their own fate.
Yes. Okay. Well, perhaps we should have included this one a little bit earlier because this is the Law and Politics blog, LRB blog, and I believe they're saying that UK could withdraw. So give us a bit about this.
It's just one of the many illustrations there are of how these blogs are confused. A lot of people want to get their oar in on this issue of Article 50, and we've got the chattering classes now saying, Article 50, invoke Article 50. Will we invoke Article 50? Will David Cameron not invoke? Who has the right to invoke Article 50? It's another one of these distraction manoeuvres, isn't it? I wish that people would start saying European Communities Act 1972, European Communities Act 1972. When will Parliament revoke the European Communities Act 1972? When will it be put in a manifesto to revoke the European Communities Act 1972? Instead of which, we've got Bernard Bogdana saying, what we'll probably do is keep all EU laws by default. And instead of getting rid of this statutory instrument stuff, this third-rate legislation that's never been through Parliament, we're actually going to promote it and solidify it into Westminster law. How about that as a default? So that's what's being presented to us instead of revoking the European Communities Act 1972.
Yes, and tell us about the Vienna Convention now.
Go and have a look at the original PDF. You'll find it easily online if you look for 1969 Vienna Convention on the Law of Treaties. And if you look at Section 5, Part 5, Section 2, Articles 46 and following, I believe, the articles from 46 onwards to 53, you will see there are many reasons why treaties, and this, by the way, this treaty predates any of the UK's involvements with the EU through treaties. You will see in this 1969 global agreement on what treaties are that there are many reasons why a state can unilaterally declare a treaty invalid or it's no longer bound by them, including, and remember this is in Mr. Heath's day, and we all know about Mr. Heath, or most of us do now, if the man signing on behalf of his country was under duress or compromised. And the first article in that series of nullifications is very interesting. It says that a nation can revoke its loyalty or its being bound by a treaty if the treaty substantially breaches its own domestic law and so that it was no longer acting in good faith. Well, I think all we need to say about that is why has the Attorney General's advice to Heath on the eve of our joining the EEC never been released? Okay, the reply's been released now, but what's still redacted is Heath's original questions to him.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, on Monday we showed Lucy Powell here saying that, and just following her resignation from the Labour Party, saying it's absolutely not a planned coup. Well, thanks for the person who sent this through to me, because of course, about a week before the referendum itself, the Telegraph published this article: Labour rebels hope to topple Jeremy Corbyn in 24-hour blitz after EU referendum. So that was published several days before the referendum vote. So clearly it absolutely was a planned coup. That's all I really want to mention on that. Well, this is quite interesting. Britain is to have a new Prime Minister by the 2nd of September, apparently. The 1922 committee that runs these things for the Conservative Party have decided that, well, things are in our hands and we will be moving as quickly as possible. That's according to MP Graham Brady. We think that the party and the country want certainty. We have just been given a very clear direction by the people of Britain. We have a big, complicated task to accomplish. I think it's entirely reasonable to expect that the government should embark on that, get on with that, seek to negotiate as good an outcome as we can before the people then are asked to approve or reject that in a general election. I'm going to ask a question in a minute, Alex, but just before we get to that, I'll just mention the Anyone But Boris campaign, because this has begun. Now, the 1922 committee is saying that they want to have a Prime Minister in place by the 2nd of September. And some people are saying that, well, this is because there's actually quite a groundswell of opinion building up against Boris, but that groundswell of opinion may not gain traction if the vote for the new leader is sooner rather than later. So there's a bit of that sort of thing going on. But there is an Anyone But Boris campaign has sprung up. So I thought that was interesting. But Alex, this notion of a general election, because of course we are bound by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act 2011 now, since this is one of the first constitutional reform pieces of legislation that Cameron's coalition government put in. What it says is basically we are required to have a 2/3 majority in Parliament now if we want to dissolve Parliament for any reason. Under the current circumstances, when there's utter chaos in the Labour Party and a certain degree, whether it's false chaos or not, in the Tory Party, I'm finding it incredibly unlikely that there's going to be a 2/3 majority possible for dissolution of Parliament for a general election. So have you got any thoughts on that? And because nobody is really discussing what the options are for holding a general election any time before 2020.
This, I agree with you, Mike. This reveals the thinking whereby Clegg exacted as his price of joining the 2010 coalition that the first item of business announced in the Rose Garden should be the Fixed Term Parliaments Bill, because that quickly became an act. You now see why. 2/3 majority is an absolute or supermajority. It's impossible to achieve. And the other route, if you agree to be bound by this statute, which is stupid in our constitution, but people are going to try and insist on it, if you agree to be bound by the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, then the only other way of having a foreshortened general election called is if the Prime Minister cannot form a government within 2 weeks. So you could have potentially a situation where Boris or May or whoever it is in September can't form a government, but again, that's vanishingly unlikely. No, but what this points to is that a mediatised crown in the British Constitution is actually more of a lame duck than those continental models that we like to look down upon, with good reason. But I mean, if you look at any European country, or famously in America in the Clinton years, they never came to it, but they had the power in the Congress to impeach the president. In 2013, the Taoiseach in the Irish Republic, Enda Kenny, tried to pull a fast one and abolish the Senate and turn the Oireachtas, the parliament there, into a unicameral legislature. And thanks to a fantastic outburst by an independent senator called David Norris, this was rescinded, and Norris was there ranting and raving, saying, we, the senators, have the right to impeach and remove the Taoiseach. So the Crown, in which our sovereignty is vested, very much has the right to dissolve Parliament in the national interest, in the name of the people at any time. But Her Majesty is never, ever, ever going to do that. Whereas in a continental model, a president, even a politically elected president who goes up on a party platform to get elected, he very much can and will dissolve Parliament. There's been countless examples in Europe in the national interest, and we're never going to see that happen. So in many ways, we're in the limbo that we've allowed ourselves to get into at the moment. We're worse off than some of the tin pot countries in Europe.
Yes. Yes, okay. Well, I'm just going to end with Gus O'Donnell, who was speaking to Radio 4 yesterday. And really, part of the argument that I've been making over the last couple of weeks is that if we are going to use Article 50 as the mechanism for getting out, well, in fact, there's no great momentum to start the process. And on Radio 4 yesterday, he was saying exactly that. This is a process that will take some time. There's no question about that. And my concern is that as time goes on and we move further and further away from the referendum result, that the excuse is going to be, well, you know, that referendum result, that was 2 years ago. Now we're really going to have to hold a general election, or we're going to have to, and we're going to have to stand on a certain platform and see what people say, or we're going to have to hold another referendum. It is never going to happen. So just to give a feeling for what O'Donnell said, he said the problem we haven't got what leave constitutes. We don't know what leave is all about. We know that people would like to have access to the single market. We'd like to have more control for the UK Parliament. We'd like to have control over migration numbers. So how can you achieve those things which are very difficult? He said when people voted leave, they were talking about, he went through this, he was talking about how, he was telling people who voted leave what they were thinking about when they were voting leave. It was incredibly arrogant. He said, if we get to a situation where a new Prime Minister, taking account of all the reasons people voted to leave, can actually come back with a really good deal, you get to a situation where you want to put that to a general election or to a second referendum. So here we are, right back into the we must renegotiate our position within the EU. This is absolutely what's being pressed forward, not only by him, but by Tony Blair and a whole bunch of others. And of course, we have Obama saying exactly the same thing. The Mail reporting today that Obama has said vote to leave is only a pause button on integration. And the other thing that O'Donnell said yesterday, which I thought was very interesting, if I can just find it here, I would see a world where we get what's really important. The people who voted leave don't want economic costs, and he went on with like that again. But he basically said that the European Union itself has a problem. And that what the European Union is going to have to do following the Brexit vote is to move as fast as it can towards further integration. So at the same time, they're saying, well, we've got to take this very slowly. We've got to be really careful. It's really only a pause button, says Obama. And O'Donnell is saying exactly the same thing. This is, increasingly apparent that they are just going to ignore the wishes of the people.
Absolutely.
And plow on ahead regardless.
But the beauty is, Mike, that these people can now be seen for what they really are. We've been through a very muddy, murky period for several years where I'm going to say we could see what was happening, but it was so difficult to give people the evidence. Now I think the smoke is all cleared and we can see these people for what they are. They're liars, cheats, deceivers. The objective is to build the European superstate, and they don't care. They don't care about British people. They certainly don't care about 17 million people who voted leave. And isn't it interesting that people like Gus O'Donnell, not even in post, he's speaking as his former role, heavily common purpose based. These people are in the wings helping control the puppet show. So we've got Gordon Brown brought forward, Tony Blair brought forward, Gus O'Donnell, John Major, all of this cabal of people who've utterly betrayed their country are the ones pushing it. We've got to expose them.
Alex?
Gus O'Donnell was the last head of the civil service in the time when I was serving. And he wrote to all the staff at the FCO and the agencies, which are FCO agencies, when Margaret Beckett became Foreign Secretary, and vastly exceeded his remit by telling us that Margaret Beckett, he could personally assure us, was a jolly good egg, and it was a good thing that she'd become Foreign Secretary. He was so arrogant that he was known by his initials, and he put it about himself. I think he rather enjoyed it. He was known by his initials, G.O.D. I think that tells you all you need to know about O'Donnell.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well, Alex, thank you very much for joining us, giving you giving us your time. Have a cup of coffee and whatever else goes with it there in Holland. Outsmiter, probably. What are we going to say to people? Well, we know now that there are 17 million people out there who are starting to go up the steps of knowledge about what the EU really is. We think that people who have been researching for many years, it's time to go out and seek those people, encourage them, give them the evidence that they need so that they can win over other people as to the dangers of the European Union. And one of the subjects we've really got to keep our eye on is what's happening to the British military, because the integration into the EU army continues apace. We know that we've got retired senior British military officers in denial that they were part of the very actions that are now leading to that European army. These people have got to be encouraged to stand up and be counted. I am happy to say I'm absolutely appalled at the cowardice amongst senior British military officers as they watch their country handed over to a foreign power. We will end just on the subject of Melanie Shaw. I have been able to speak to Melanie, very interesting. She's back in prison. She's been put in segregation, so effectively she's having better treatment, but she's being given special treatment, which is that she's not in with other prisoners. And there's uncertainty around court proceedings. How has she ended up in this position? I would say because the stress of having her son taken away by the state after she whistle blew on child abuse has been a great strain on her constitution. So if you can write to Melanie, we did put up the address on yesterday's news, and you can freeze frame that segment. We'll also get it up on the website. And I'm very pleased to say that after our announcement yesterday that Brian and Janice Doherty were missing, in fact, within the timescale of yesterday's news, somebody reported that they were safe and well, but they have had to lead a very secretive life because they are still subject to horrific abuse and intimidation by the state, principally now, of course, the Garda in Ireland, the Irish state, in collaboration with Police Scotland and the Scottish state. So what a state of affairs as we see what Britain has become under the Blairite and the Cameron governments, a dictatorship, and we're getting the arrogance to show that in Parliament at the moment, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, that's it from us. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're not a subscriber, please consider taking out a subscription. It's only with your help we can do what we do. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.